The morning sun broke over Madisonville, Texas, painting the dusty streets in shades of amber and gold, and Reed Brennan thought he might be the loneliest man in the entire state until he saw her kneeling by the creek, tearing apart what looked like her only meal to feed a gathering of sparrows and jays. Reed had ridden into town 3 days prior, his saddlebags light and his prospects lighter, looking for ranch work or anything that might keep him from drifting further into the nothing that seemed to swallow men whole out here in 1878. He had stopped his horse near the livery stable, intending to water the animal before heading to the saloon for information about work, when movement by the creek caught his eye. A young woman in a faded calico dress sat on her heels, breaking apart what appeared to be cornbread, scattering the pieces around her while birds descended in a chaotic flutter of wings and song. Most folks would have eaten first, saved the scraps for later. But this woman was feeding the birds like they were her own children, her face lit with a smile that made something in Reed's chest tighten painfully. He had been alone for so long, drifting from one cattle drive to another, one town to the next, never putting down roots because there had never been a reason to stay anywhere. His parents had died of fever when he was 16, and the small farm in Missouri had been sold to pay their debts. He had been wandering ever since, and now at 26, he figured he might wander until he died. But watching this woman laugh as a brave sparrow landed on her knee, Reed felt something shift inside him, like a compass needle finally finding true north. She had auburn hair that caught the sunlight, pulled back in a simple braid that hung down her back. Her dress had been mended in several places, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, but she wore it with the kind of dignity that spoke of pride despite poverty. Reed guessed she was somewhere in her early 20s, though hardship had a way of making people look both older and younger than their years out here. When the last crumb had been distributed and the birds had scattered, the woman stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. That was when she noticed Reed watching her. Most women would have looked away, embarrassed to be caught in such an intimate moment, but she met his gaze directly, her chin lifting slightly. "Morning," Reed called out, tipping his hat. His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from disuse. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice that probably never rose in anger but could carry across a field when needed. Reed dismounted, leading his horse closer but keeping a respectful distance. "That was kindly of you, feeding the birds your breakfast." A slight color rose in her cheeks. "They were hungry." "Looked like you might be too," she shrugged, a gesture that tried for carelessness but did not quite achieve it. "I will eat later." Reed wanted to say something more, wanted to keep her talking so he could listen to that voice a while longer, but he could not find the words. He had never been good with words, especially around women. Instead, he just nodded, standing there feeling foolish while she studied him with eyes the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of brown. "You are new in town," she said. It was not a question. "Arrived 3 days back, looking for work." "There is always work for those willing to do it. The Hutchison Ranch north of town needs hands. Tom Hutchison is a fair man, pays decent wages." "Much obliged for the information." Reed paused, then added, "I am Reed Brennan, Willa Thompson." She did not offer her hand, and he did not expect her to. Unmarried women did not shake hands with strange men, not in decent society. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Thompson." "Mrs.," she corrected quietly. "I am a widow." The words hit Reed like a physical blow, though he could not have said why. Perhaps because he had already been imagining a future that included her, and the knowledge that she had belonged to another man made that future seem further away, more complicated. "I am sorry for your loss." "It was 2 years ago, the fever that came through." She said it matter-of-factly, but Reed heard the pain underneath, carefully controlled and locked away. "I should be getting back. Good day, Mr. Brennan." She walked away before he could respond, heading toward a small house at the edge of town that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. Reed watched her go, feeling that pull in his chest grow stronger rather than weaker with distance. He spent the rest of the day riding out to the Hutchison Ranch, where he was hired on the spot. Tom Hutchison was indeed a fair man, gruff but honest, with a weathered face and hands like leather. The ranch ran cattle and horses, and they needed men who knew how to work hard. Reed knew how to work hard. It was about all he knew. That night, lying in the bunkhouse with 5 other ranch hands, Reed found his thoughts drifting back to Willa Thompson. He wondered what her husband had been like, wondered if she had loved him, wondered if she still grieved. He wondered what she did for money, living alone in that ramshackle house. He wondered if she went hungry often, giving away her food to birds. The next morning, before riding out to the range, Reed stopped by the general store in town. The proprietor, a heavy-set man named Gerald Porter, greeted him with the professional friendliness of someone who sized up a customer's worth in the first 3 seconds. "What can I do for you?" "I need some supplies. Cornmeal, bacon, coffee, sugar. Enough for a week or so." Porter began gathering the items, wrapping them in brown paper and twine. As he worked, Reed said casually, "I met Mrs. Thompson yesterday. Seems like a nice lady." Porter's hand stilled for just a moment. "Willa Thompson is one of the finest women in this town. Her husband was a good man, worked as a farrier. When he died, she took over the work best she could, but folks do not like doing business with a woman. She gets by, but just barely. She shoes horses, when people let her, which is not often enough." Porter finished wrapping the supplies and quoted a price. Reed paid, then hefted the package. "You mind pointing me toward her place? I was thinking she might be able to check my horse's shoes." Porter's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to determine Reed's intentions, but after a moment he nodded. "Head down Main Street toward the creek. Her place is the small house with the blue door. You cannot miss it." Reed found the house easily enough. Up close, it looked even more weathered than he had thought, but someone had tried to make it cheerful. Wildflowers grew in a small patch by the door, and the windows, though covered with simple muslin curtains, were clean. He tied his horse to the fence post and approached the door, suddenly feeling nervous in a way he had not felt in years. He knocked. Footsteps sounded inside, and then the door opened. Willa stood there, surprise evident on her face. "Mr. Brennan." "Mrs. Thompson." "I hope I am not disturbing you. Porter at the general store said you do farrier work." Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "I do, when there is need. My horse threw a shoe about a week back. I had it replaced in the last town, but the work was not the best. I was hoping you might take a look, make sure everything is sound." It was a lie. His horse's shoes were fine, but it was the best excuse Reed could think of to see her again. Willa studied him for a long moment, and Reed had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through him. But finally she nodded. "Bring him around to the back. I have a forge there." Reed led his horse around the side of the house to a small shed. Inside was a surprisingly well-maintained forge, tools hanging neatly on the walls, everything clean and organized. Willa had already put on a leather apron over her dress and was stoking the forge fire. "Which hoof?" she asked. "Front left." She approached the horse confidently, running her hand down its leg until it lifted its hoof. She examined the shoe carefully, testing it, checking the nails. After a long moment she looked up at Reed. This shoe was set well. There is nothing wrong with it. Reed felt heat rise in his face. "I see. The other shoes are all fine too. Your horse is well shod, Mr. Brennan. You wasted a trip out here." He could have left then, could have made an excuse and ridden off, but something in him would not let him leave without being honest. The trip was not wasted. She set the horse's hoof down gently, then straightened, meeting his eyes. "Why are you really here? I brought you something." He retrieved the package from his saddlebag and held it out. "I noticed you were feeding your breakfast to the birds, thought you might need supplies." Willa did not take the package. Her jaw tightened and Reed saw a flash of something in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or anger. "I do not need charity." "It is not charity. I just thought, you thought I am some poor widow who needs saving." Her voice remained quiet, but there was steel underneath now. "I manage just fine, Mr. Brennan. I do not need a stranger bringing me handouts." "That was not my intention. I apologize if I offended you." "You did." She pulled off the apron, hanging it on a nail. "I think you should go." Reed wanted to argue, wanted to explain himself better, but he recognized when he had made a mistake. He tucked the package back in his saddlebag and mounted his horse. Before he rode off, he looked down at her. "I truly am sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I just saw someone with a good heart, and I wanted to do something kind in return. I went about it wrong." He rode away before she could respond, feeling like the biggest fool in Texas. For the next week, Reed threw himself into ranch work, trying to forget about Willa Thompson and the way she had looked at him with those creek water eyes. He helped move cattle to better grazing, mended fences, broke a young stallion that nearly killed him twice. The work was hard and the days were long, which suited him fine. It kept him from thinking. But on Sunday, his day off, he found himself riding into town despite his better judgment. He told himself he needed supplies, told himself he was not looking for her. But when he saw a small crowd gathered near the church, he could not help but ride closer to see what was happening. Willa stood in the center of the crowd, her face pale but composed, facing down a tall man in a black suit. Reed recognized him as Cyrus Marsh, a local businessman who owned the bank and half the buildings in town. Marsh had a reputation for being ruthless, squeezing every penny he could from folks. "The payment was due yesterday, Mrs. Thompson," Marsh was saying, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have been patient, but my patience has limits." "I told you I would have it by the end of the month," Willa said. Her voice did not waver, but Reed could see her hands clenched in her skirt. "I have 3 jobs lined up. I will have your money. Promises do not pay debts. I want payment now, or I will have to start foreclosure proceedings on your property." "You cannot do that." "I have until the end of the month. Actually, if you read the contract your late husband signed, you will see that I can call in the debt at any time if I have reason to believe payment will not be forthcoming. And frankly, Mrs. Thompson, a woman trying to run a farrier business is not a sound investment." Reed felt anger surge through him. He dismounted and pushed through the crowd, planting himself between Willa and Marsh. "How much does she owe?" Marsh looked him up and down with distaste. "This does not concern you, Cowboy." I asked how much. $85 plus interest, $95 total. Reed pulled out his money, counting it carefully. He had been paid the day before and had nearly $100 saved. He handed $95 to Marsh. "There. The debt is paid." Marsh took the money, counted it, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. "I see. Well then, the debt is satisfied." He looked at Willa. "You are lucky to have such a generous friend, Mrs. Thompson. Good day." He walked away, the crowd dispersing with murmurs and whispers. Willa stood frozen, staring at Reed with an expression he could not read. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked. "Because it was wrong what he was doing." "I told you I do not need charity." "It was not charity." Reed was not sure what it was, actually. An investment. A gift. All he knew was that he could not have stood by and watched her lose her home. "You can pay me back when you are able. At interest." No, just the $95 whenever you can manage it. Willa looked away, blinking rapidly. When she looked back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you. I do not know how I will repay you, but I will. Every cent. I know you will. They stood there in the empty street, the morning sun climbing higher, and Reed felt that pull in his chest again, stronger than ever. He wanted to say something meaningful, wanted to tell her that he had not been able to stop thinking about her since that first morning by the creek, but the words stuck in his throat. I should go, he said instead. Wait. She took a step closer. Have you had breakfast? No, madam. Then come to my house. It is the least I can do. Reed knew he should refuse, knew that it would only make things harder when he inevitably had to leave, or when she made it clear she had no interest in him beyond gratitude. But he found himself nodding anyway, following her back to the little house with the blue door. Inside, the house was small but immaculately kept. A simple table and 2 chairs sat in the main room, along with a cast iron stove and a few shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was old and worn but clean. Willa gestured for him to sit while she busied herself at the stove, building up the fire and setting a pan on to heat. I do not have much, she said. Eggs and bread, some jam. That sounds fine. She worked quietly, and Reed watched her move around the small space with practiced efficiency. After a few minutes, she set a plate in front of him with scrambled eggs and toasted bread spread with strawberry jam. She sat across from him with her own plate, but Reed noticed hers held about half as much as his. You need to eat more than that, he said. This is plenty. They ate in silence for a while. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bread fresh. Reed could not remember the last time he had eaten in a real home, sitting at a table with a woman. It felt strange and wonderful at the same time. You are a good cook, he said. Thank you. My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to make a meal from almost nothing, because there will be times when that is all you have. Your mother sounds wise. She was. She died when I was 17, childbirth. Willa paused, pushing her eggs around her plate. The baby died too, a boy. I am sorry. Seems like I have lost everyone I ever loved. My father went a year later. Heart just gave out. Then I married Samuel and he was good to me, really good. We had 3 happy years together. Then the fever came and he was gone too. Reed heard the weight of all that loss in her voice, and it made his own loneliness seem small by comparison. That is a heavy burden to carry. We all carry something. She looked up at him. What do you carry, Mr. Brennan? No one had ever asked him that before. Reed found himself talking, telling her about his parents, about the farm he had lost, about the years of drifting from place to place, never belonging anywhere. He told her about the loneliness that had become so constant, he barely noticed it anymore. Like a stone in his boot he had learned to walk around. Willa listened without interrupting, her full attention on him in a way that made him feel truly seen for the first time in years. That sounds lonely, she said when he finished. It has been, until recently. She held his gaze, something shifting in her expression. You should not have paid my debt. It was too much money and you barely know me. I know enough. What do you think you know? Reed chose his words carefully. I know you have a good heart. I know you are proud and strong and you do not give up. I know you would rather go hungry than let birds starve. That tells me everything I need to know. A flush crept up her neck into her cheeks. You are making assumptions based on one moment. Am I wrong? She did not answer, just stood and began clearing the plates. Reed helped her, carrying dishes to the wash basin. In the small space, they kept almost bumping into each other, creating a charged awareness that made Reed's pulse quicken. I should go, he said again, though he did not want to. I have taken up enough of your morning, Mr. Brennan. She turned to face him, drying her hands on a towel. "I do not know what you want from me. Nothing you are not willing to give. I am not looking for a husband. I was a good wife to Samuel, and when he died, I thought I might die too. I do not want to go through that kind of pain again." Reed felt disappointment settle in his stomach, but he nodded. "I understand. But," she continued, her voice softer now, "I would not mind a friend. It has been lonely since Samuel died. People either pity me or avoid me. You are the first person in 2 years who has treated me like I am just a person, not a tragic figure. I would be honored to be your friend, Mrs. Thompson. Willa. If we are to be friends, you should call me Willa." "Then you should call me Reed." She smiled, and it transformed her whole face, making her look younger and lighter. "All right, Reed." Over the following weeks, Reed found excuses to visit Willa whenever he had time off from the ranch. Sometimes he would bring his horse by, claiming it needed attention, and they would stand in her workshop talking while she worked. Other times he would meet her in town, and they would walk along the creek together, talking about everything and nothing. Reed learned that Willa had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She could make observations about townspeople that had him laughing until his sides hurt. She told him about her dreams of expanding her farrier business, maybe even buying more land, building a bigger workshop. She wanted to prove that a woman could run a business just as well as any man. Reed told her about his own dreams, which he had barely acknowledged even to himself. He wanted land of his own, a small ranch maybe, nothing fancy. Just enough to feel like he belonged somewhere, like he had roots. He wanted to wake up in the same place every morning and know it was his. "Why do you not buy land here?" Willa asked one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. "I have some money saved, but not enough for land. Maybe someday." "You could work the Hutchison Ranch and save. Tom Hutchison is a fair employer." "True enough. But I always figured I would move on eventually. Never seemed like there was a reason to stay in one place." Willa was quiet for a moment. "And now?" Reed looked at her, at the sunlight catching in her auburn hair, at the way her eyes reflected the creek water, and he felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Now I am finding reasons." She held his gaze, and Reed saw something in her expression that gave him hope. But before he could say anything more, she stood, brushing off her skirt. "I should get back. I have a customer coming by later." As the weeks turned into months, Reed found himself falling deeper in love with Willa. He loved the way she laughed, throwing her head back unself-consciously. He loved how she talked to horses like they were people, speaking to them in a low, soothing voice that made them trust her. He loved her stubbornness, the way she refused to back down when she believed she was right. He loved her kindness, the way she still fed the birds her breakfast even when she had so little. But Willa had been clear about not wanting a husband, and Reed respected that. He treasured their friendship, even though it was slowly killing him to be near her and not be able to tell her how he felt. He told himself that friendship was enough, that he should be grateful for what she was willing to give him. Then, one day in late October, everything changed. Reed had ridden into town to meet Willa as usual. They had planned to have lunch together, and he had been looking forward to it all week. But when he arrived at her house, he found her sitting on the front step, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. He was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her. "Willa, what is wrong?" She looked up, and he saw that she had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy. "He is back." "Who is back?" "Samuel's brother, Daniel. He just left." Reed felt a chill run through him. "What did he want?" "Money. He says Samuel owed him $300. He has a letter supposedly written by Samuel promising to pay him back. He wants the money now, or he says he will take me to court and I will lose everything." "Let me see the letter." Willa went inside and came back with a piece of paper. Reed read it carefully. The handwriting was cramped and the wording was vague, but it was signed with Samuel Thompson's name. "This could be a forgery," Reed said. "I know, but how can I prove it? Samuel has been dead for 2 years. And Daniel knows I cannot afford a lawyer to fight him in court. When does he want the money? 2 weeks. He gave me 2 weeks to come up with $300. Willa laughed bitterly. "I barely make $3 a week. How am I supposed to get 300? Reed stood up, his mind racing. He had about $70 saved now, having spent most of his money paying Willa's debt to Marsh. Even if he gave her everything he had, it would not be nearly enough. "I will figure something out," he said. "Reed, no, you have done too much already. I cannot ask you to help me again. You are not asking, I am offering." "Why?" Willa stood, facing him with a mixture of frustration and desperation. "Why do you keep helping me? What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them. Reed knew this was his moment, his chance to finally be honest. But he was terrified that if he told her the truth, he would lose her friendship, and that friendship had become the most important thing in his life. "Because I care about you," he said finally. "As a friend." "Yes, as a friend." The lie tasted bitter, but he could not bring himself to tell her more. Willa studied his face for a long moment, and Reed had the unsettling feeling that she could see right through him again. But she just nodded slowly. "I have to do this myself. I appreciate everything you have done, but I cannot keep taking your money. It is not right." "Then let me help you another way. We will figure out if that letter is real. We will talk to people who knew Samuel, see if anyone heard him mention owing money to his brother." Willa considered this. "That is a good idea. But Reed, even if we prove it is a forgery, Daniel is not going to just go away. He is a mean man, always has been. He resented Samuel for being happy, for having a good marriage. I would not put anything past him. Then we will deal with that too." Over the next few days, Reed and Willa talked to everyone who had known Samuel Thompson. The picture that emerged was of a careful, honest man who never borrowed money he could not repay. Several people confirmed that Samuel and Daniel had not been close, that Daniel had left town shortly before Samuel married Willa and had not been heard from since. But none of this would hold up in court without solid proof. They needed to catch Daniel in his lie, and that would require strategy. Reed had an idea. It was risky, but it might work. "We need to make him think you have the money," he told Willa. "Get him to confess that the letter is fake, or at least say something incriminating. I will be hidden nearby listening. Then we can go to the sheriff with what we heard." "He will never confess. He is too smart for that, maybe. But desperate people make mistakes, and if he thinks he is about to get $300, he might get careless." They set the trap for the following Saturday. Willa sent word to Daniel that she had the money and would meet him at her house in the evening. Reed arrived early, hiding in the workshop with the door slightly ajar so he could hear everything. Daniel Thompson arrived just after sunset. Through the crack in the door, Reed could see him. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and small, mean eyes. He walked with the swagger of someone who thought he was smarter than everyone else. "Well, Willa," Daniel said as she let him in, "I am impressed. I did not think you would be able to get the money so quickly. I had help from that cowboy I have been hearing about, Reed Brennan. Seems like you have found yourself a new man to take care of you. Reed is a friend, nothing more." "Sure he is. Well, it does not matter to me where the money came from. Let me see it." Reed heard rustling, then Willa's voice. "Before I give this to you, I need to ask you something. Are you sure Samuel owed you this money? He never mentioned it to me. Are you calling me a liar? I am just asking. $300 is a lot of money. Samuel kept careful records. There is nothing in his papers about a debt to you." Daniel's voice hardened. "Maybe he did not want you to know. Maybe he was ashamed that he had to borrow from his little brother. Or maybe this letter is a forgery and you are trying to cheat a widow out of money she does not have. Reed heard the sound of a slap, then Willa's gasp. He was out of the workshop in an instant, bursting through the door just as Daniel raised his hand again. "That is enough," Reed said, his voice low and dangerous. Daniel spun around, his face flushing red. "This is none of your business, Cowboy. You just made it my business." Reed stepped between Daniel and Willa, his fists clenched. "The sheriff is on his way. Willa sent someone to fetch him before you arrived. He will be very interested to hear about your forged letter. You cannot prove it is forged. Maybe not. But we can prove you just struck a woman. That is assault. You will go to jail for that." Daniel's eyes darted between Reed and Willa, calculating. Then he lunged for the door, but Reed was faster. He grabbed Daniel's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to his knees. "You are not going anywhere." They held Daniel until Sheriff Tom Mercer arrived 10 minutes later. Reed explained what had happened, and Willa showed the sheriff the letter. Mercer, a gray-haired man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, studied it carefully. "This looks like a forgery to me," he said. "The signature is close, but it does not quite match the way Samuel Thompson wrote his name. I have enough of his correspondence from when he was alive to compare." He looked at Daniel. "You are under arrest for attempted fraud and assault." As Mercer led Daniel away, Willa sank into a chair, her hand on her cheek where Daniel had struck her. Reed knelt beside her, gently moving her hand to examine the red mark. "Are you all right?" "Yes. It could have been worse if you had not been here. I will always be here when you need me." Willa looked at him, really looked at him, and Reed saw her expression shift into something he had not seen before. "Why, Reed? Why do you care so much?" This time he could not lie. "Because I love you. I have loved you since that first morning when I saw you feeding the birds. I love your kindness and your strength and your stubbornness. I love everything about you, and I know you said you do not want a husband, and I have tried to respect that. But I cannot keep pretending that we are just friends. Not anymore." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "I have been so afraid." "Afraid of what? Of this? Of feeling something again? When Samuel died, it nearly destroyed me. I thought if I never let myself love anyone else, I would never have to go through that pain again." She reached up, touching Reed's face with trembling fingers. "But then you came along and you were so kind, so good, and I tried not to care about you, I really did, but I failed." Reed's heart felt like it might burst. "Failed? I love you too, Reed. I think I have for a while now, I just did not want to admit it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. She held him just as tightly, and they stayed that way for a long moment, neither wanting to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Reed cupped her face in his hands. "I want to marry you, Willa. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, right here in Madisonville. I want to buy land and start a ranch, and I want you to run the best farrier business in Texas. I want everything with you." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Her lips were soft and sweet, and she kissed him back with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Willa was smiling through her tears. "I never thought I would be happy again," she said. "Thank you for proving me wrong." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Madisonville, with half the town in attendance. Tom Hutchison served as Reed's best man, and Martha Porter, the wife of the general store owner, stood up with Willa. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Reed had spent every dollar he had left on a thin gold band for Willa, and when he slipped it onto her finger, he felt like the richest man alive. She wore a dress that Martha had helped her make, pale blue with lace at the collar, and she looked so beautiful that Reed had to blink back tears. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the church hall. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter and more food than Reed had seen in years. He danced with Willa, holding her close, aware of the envious looks from some of the other men. She was his now, his wife, and he could barely believe his good fortune. That night, in the small house with the blue door that was now their home, Reed made love to his wife for the first time. It was tender and awkward and absolutely perfect. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Willa's head on Reed's chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I love you," she murmured, half asleep. "I love you too," he replied. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." In the months that followed, they worked hard to build their life together. Reed continued working at the Hutchison Ranch, saving every penny he could. Willa's farrier business slowly grew as word spread that she was just as skilled as any man, maybe more so. Reed helped her in the workshop when he could, learning the trade, appreciating the skill and care she put into every horseshoe. They bought the lot next to Willa's house, and together, they began building a bigger workshop. It took months of hard work, every spare moment spent sawing and hammering and hauling materials. But finally, it was finished. A sturdy building with room for multiple horses and all the tools Willa needed. Business picked up significantly after that. Ranchers and farmers who had been hesitant to hire a woman were impressed by the quality of her work and the professionalism of the operation. Reed handled the business side of things, keeping the books and dealing with difficult customers, while Willa focused on the actual farrier work. 2 years after they married, Reed had saved enough money to make an offer on a small parcel of land just outside town. It was 50 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it and a small stand of oak trees. It was perfect. They built their house together, a real house this time, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen big enough for a proper table. It had a front porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. It had glass windows and a stone fireplace and a bedroom door that closed. To Reed, who had spent most of his adult life sleeping in bunkhouses or under the stars, it was a palace. They moved in on a warm day in May, and that night they christened every room in the house, laughing and making love like newlyweds even though they had been married for 2 years. Afterward, lying in their big new bed in their own bedroom in their own house on their own land, Reed felt a contentment so profound it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking about?" Willa asked, tracing patterns on his chest with her finger. "About how lucky I am. About how I could have ridden past Madisonville that day and never stopped. About how different my life would be if I had not seen you feeding those birds. I think about that too sometimes. About how lonely I was before you came. About how sure I was that I would never be happy again." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You saved me, Reed. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too." They bought cattle to stock their land, just a small herd at first and a few good horses. Reed still worked at the Hutchison Ranch part-time to bring in steady money while they got their own operation established. Willa continued her farrier business, which was now thriving. Between the two of them, they were making a decent living and building something that would last. 3 years into their marriage, Willa told Reed she was pregnant. They had been hoping for a child but had not wanted to rush things. When she gave him the news, Reed felt a joy so intense he thought his heart might explode. He picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and scold him at the same time. "Put me down, you fool. You will make me dizzy. I am going to be a father," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1884, after a long and difficult labor that left Reed terrified he might lose Willa. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when the baby's first cry filled their bedroom, Reed felt tears streaming down his face. They named him Samuel after Willa's first husband. Reed had suggested it, knowing how much Samuel Thompson had meant to Willa, and she had cried when he brought it up. "Are you sure?" she had asked. "I am married to you now. This is your son. He can honor both the man who loved you first and the man who loves you now," Reed had replied. "Samuel Thompson sounds like he was a good man. Our son could do worse than to be named after him." Little Samuel was a healthy, loud baby who kept them up most nights, but Reed did not mind. He would sit in the rocking chair he had made, holding his son, watching the tiny face scrunch up as the baby yawned or frowned in his sleep. He sang to him, old songs his mother had sung to him, and told him stories about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when Samuel was older. Willa would watch them from the bed, her eyes soft with love. "You are a good father," she told Reed one night. "I hope so. I want to be the kind of father my father was to me, kind and patient and always there. You will be." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, more horses. Reed hired a young man named James to help with the work, a good kid who was reliable and hardworking. Willa had to slow down with the farrier business while caring for Samuel, but she still took on jobs when she could, and Reed helped more with the physical work. When Samuel was 2, Willa became pregnant again. This time it was twins, girls, born on a warm summer evening. They named them Rose and Ruby, and they were identical, with auburn hair like their mother and their father's green, flecked brown eyes. The house was suddenly very full and very loud. Between 3 small children and the ranch work and the farrier business, Reed and Willa barely had a moment to themselves. But they were happy, deeply and completely happy, in a way Reed had never imagined possible. He would sometimes stop in the middle of a task, a hammer in his hand or a rope over his shoulder, and just look at his life. At the house he had built with his own hands. At the land that belonged to him, the cattle with his brand on them. At his children playing in the yard while his wife worked in her forge, her face flushed from the heat, her hair escaping from its braid. And he would remember that lonely cowboy who had ridden into Madisonville 7 years ago with nothing but a horse and a vague hope of finding work. That man had been lost, drifting, with no purpose and no home. Now he had everything. The years passed. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and had his mother's way with them. Rose and Ruby were wild and fearless, always getting into trouble, keeping Reed and Willa on their toes. When the twins were 4, Willa gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Tom Hutchison, who had become like family to them. The ranch prospered. They expanded their land holdings, buying adjacent parcels as they became available. Reed became known as a fair employer and an honest rancher, and the Brennan name meant something in Madisonville. Willa's farrier business had a reputation that extended well beyond the town, with customers coming from as far as 50 miles away for her work. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, with enough money to provide for their children and save for the future. More importantly, they had each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Reed took Willa back to the creek where he had first seen her feeding the birds. It was early morning, just like that first day, and the light was the same amber gold. They stood together on the bank, his arms around her from behind, her head resting back against his shoulder. "You remember?" he asked. "Of course. You were staring at me like I was crazy. I was staring at you like you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I fell in love with you in that moment." Willa turned in his arms to face him, At 33, she was even more beautiful than she had been at 23. Life and love and motherhood had only enhanced her beauty, adding depth and richness to her features. "I was so scared to let myself feel anything for you," she admitted. "But you were patient, you were kind, you never pushed, never demanded more than I was ready to give. I would have waited forever if that was what you needed. I know, that is why I did not have to." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for seeing me that day. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for everything that came after. Thank you for feeding those birds your breakfast. If you had been selfish, if you had kept that food for yourself, I never would have known what kind of person you were. I never would have had the courage to talk to you." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, listening to the creek and the birds and the quiet morning sounds. Then they walked back to their house together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day would bring. More years passed. Their children grew. Samuel became a skilled rancher, learning everything Reed could teach him. At 16, he was already running half the operation, and Reed knew that someday the ranch would be in good hands. The twins, Rose and Ruby, were 15 now, beautiful and spirited, drawing attention from every young man in the county, much to Reed's consternation. Thomas was 11, quiet like his older brother but with a mischievous streak that kept things interesting. Then, when Reed was 42 and Willa was 40, they had one final surprise. Another baby, a girl they named Grace. She was unexpected and precious, doted on by her older siblings and absolutely adored by her parents. Reed held his youngest daughter on the front porch one evening, watching the sun set over his land. Willa sat beside him, her hand on his knee, her head tilted back with her eyes closed, soaking in the last warmth of the day. "We have had a good life," Reed said quietly. "We have had a wonderful life. Do you ever think about how things might have been different if I had not come to Madisonville, if you had not been feeding those birds that morning?" Sometimes. But then I stop myself, because thinking about it is terrifying. How easily we might have missed each other. How many tiny choices led to us being in the right place at the right time. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "I believe we were meant to find each other. I have to believe that, because the alternative is too frightening to consider." "I believe it too." Grace stirred in his arms, making a small sound. Reed looked down at her tiny face, so perfect and new, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This child, these children, this woman, this life. It was everything he had never dared to dream of. "I love you," he told Willa. He said it every day, multiple times a day, and it never felt like enough. "I love you too," she replied. She said it just as often, and he never got tired of hearing it. They sat there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep blue. The land stretched out before them, their land, the place they had built together through hard work and love and determination. In the house behind them, their children were laughing about something, the sound floating out through the open windows. This was home. This was everything. Reed thought back to that lonely cowboy who had ridden into town 18 years ago, so lost and alone he barely knew who he was anymore. That man would have been astonished by this life, by this happiness. He would have thought it was impossible, but it was not impossible. It was real. It was right here, in his arms and beside him and all around him, and it had all started with a simple act of kindness. A woman feeding birds her breakfast because they were hungry and she had a good heart. Reed had recognized that goodness, had been drawn to it like a moth to a flame. He had claimed her heart, yes, but she had claimed his just as completely. They had saved each other, really. Two lonely people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, when they were both ready to take a chance on love one more time. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Reed leaned over and kissed his wife's temple. She smiled without opening her eyes, her hand tightening on his knee. "What was that for?" she murmured. "Just because." I will take it." Grace fell asleep in Reed's arms, her tiny hand curled around his finger. He held her carefully, this precious gift, this unexpected blessing. Inside, he could hear Samuel telling his younger siblings a story, his deep voice patient and kind. He heard Rose and Ruby laughing at something, their voices so similar it was impossible to tell them apart. He heard Thomas asking questions, always curious, always wanting to know more. This was his family, his legacy, the life he had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. The night air grew cooler and Willa stood stretching. "We should go in. Put Grace to bed." Reed stood as well, cradling his daughter against his chest. They walked into their house together, into the warmth and light and love that filled every room. Willa went to check on the older children while Reed carried Grace to her cradle in their bedroom. He laid her down gently, tucking a blanket around her tiny form, and stood watching her sleep for a moment. "You are going to have such a good life," he whispered to her. "You are going to grow up knowing you are loved, knowing you are safe. You will have brothers and sisters who will always look out for you. You will have parents who would do anything for you. And someday, when you are grown, I hope you find someone who loves you the way I love your mother. The kind of love that makes everything else worthwhile." Grace slept on, oblivious to her father's words but surrounded by his love nonetheless. Willa appeared in the doorway. "Everyone is settled. Come to bed." Reed followed her and they climbed into their bed together, the same bed they had shared for 18 years. They curled up together, her back to his front, his arm around her waist, fitting together the way they always had. "Reed," Willa said quietly. "Yes. Do you ever regret it? Stopping in Madisonville, staying here. You used to dream about seeing more of the country, going to California maybe. Do you ever wish you had done those things?" Reed thought about it for a moment, really considered it. "No," he said finally. "Not for a single second. Everything I ever wanted is right here. You are right here. Our children are here. This is my home, Willa. Not because of the land or the house, but because of you. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." He felt her relax against him, heard the smile in her voice when she spoke. "Good answer. It is the truth." They lay there in comfortable silence, listening to the house settle around them, to the sounds of their children sleeping in the other rooms, to the night sounds outside the windows. It was peaceful and perfect, and Reed felt a deep satisfaction settle over him. He had been so lonely once, so lost. But that woman by the creek, breaking apart her breakfast to feed hungry birds, had shown him the way home. Her kindness had called to something in him, had made him want to be better, to do better, to build something lasting, and they had built it together. This life, this family, this love. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible. As he drifted off to sleep, his wife safe in his arms, Reed's last thought was one of profound gratitude. For that morning by the creek, for Willa's good heart, for the courage to claim that heart and offer his own in return, for all the years that had come after and all the years still to come, for the life they had made and the love that sustained them through everything. It had all been worth it. Every moment, every struggle, every challenge. It had all led to this, to home, to love, to everything that mattered, and in the morning he would wake up next to Willa and start another day in this beautiful life they had created together. There would be work to do and children to tend and a ranch to run. There would be challenges and joys and everything in between, but they would face it all together, just as they had faced everything else. Side by side, hand in hand, hearts forever intertwined, the lonely cowboy had found his home, and the woman with the heart of gold had found hers too in him. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after.